I don't know. I'm already getting him started. Hello, I'm Bill Fairman. This is Wendy Sweet, and that is Jonathan Davis. We are Carolina Capital Management. Thank you to the Passive Wealth Show. Thank you for joining us on the Passive Wealth
for
Show.
everyone who wants passive wealth.
That's right. Have any of you guys ever been interested in self-storage and wondered, how to underwrite a property? Is it going to be a decent value add, or are you just buying something that's already performing and
It's a long teaser.
you're just gonna shut up? All right, well, I'm just gonna get to it then.
This is more like foreplay.
We'll let you know
Not for him.
as soon as we come back. I can't work with these people.
Shame he has no choice, right?
I would leave, except they have us locked in this room.
So anyway, that's us.
All right, so we are Carolina Capital Management. We make investor loans in the Southeast. If you're a borrower interested in borrowing money, then go to our website, carolinahardmoney.com. Click on the Apply Now tab. If you're a passive investor looking for passive returns, click on the Accredited Investor tab. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell. I almost made it all the way through.
Hey, I'm here for you, Bill.
I'm just going to laugh.
So we have our good friend, Fernando Angelucci, and we all love saying his name.
And it's great.
Well, he was our good friend before we had our pre-conversation with him. After you built him up like that, I don't know if he's.
And then, so I built him up, telling him that he was in our top 10, and then I let him. But we do this because we love each other.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Actually, Fernando was in statistics was in our top 10 of videos viewed this past year.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Congratulations. So it's great to have you back. Look, the story. I love that.
You like that?
That's great.
I love that. So are you using that on all your own podcasts and videos?
Yeah, so we figured that it'd just be easier to find the alliteration. So my business partner that does all the marketing came up with it. He thought it was a little bit less of a mouthful than Titan Wealth Group and Impact Self Storage. So
the storage stuff.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. What are we?
Lullaby lenders.
There you go.
We're the morons with the money.
Yeah. Money morons.
I love that. So I don't want to take too much away from Fernando's stuff, but he's going to teach us how to, and this is going to be a two-parter. So we're going to have him back on another show. He's going to kind of go through what all they go through in underwriting self-storage properties.
Awesome.
So you know what? I'm just going to say, take it away, my friend.
Okay. You guys mind if I share my screen here?
Do.
Not at all.
Absolutely.
All right. Just had a little presentation built for you guys.
Unless I have to give you permission.
I think Sharub has to do that. No,
There you go.
Great, cool.
Bomb.
All right. So as the wonderful people at Carolina Capital Management just introduced, my name is Fernando Angelucci, the storage stud. And today I kind of lullaby lenders, morons with the money. Is that right? So, like they said, I'm a self-storage investor, and the reason I got into self-storage is because I was tired of the problems that came along with owning residential real estate, the tenants, the toilets, the trash. So what we decided to do was about 4 years ago, start selling off all of our single family and multifamily assets for something that was a lot easier to work with and provide a lot more upside than habitation real estate, or real estate where someone lives in your property. So just as a rough recap of why I went into self-storage, and this is a presentation I can do in depth at another time, but just quickly here, because I know everybody wants to get to the meat and potatoes. The reason that I went into storage as opposed to residential real estate was, number one, historically it has higher returns than residential real estate and multifamily. Number two, it's a recession tolerant or recession resilient asset. In the last now 4 recessions, including the pandemic, it has outperformed single family and multifamily properties by about 4%, which compounded equates to about double your return in a 20 to 25 year period. Fantastic leverage offered to us by the banks. And the reason why is because it has the lowest default rate of any asset class that banks typically lend on. So they really want these loans in their books to stabilize the risk of their portfolio. Much easier management than multifamily and portfolios of single family homes by a factor of usually 1/4 to 1/5 the amount of time needed to manage an equivalent size portfolio on a dollar per dollar basis. Extremely fragmented market. About 73% of the 65 to 70,000 self-storage facilities in the nation are owned by mom and pop investors, meaning they only own 1 or 2 storage facilities. It's not all owned by these huge conglomerates. So there's a lot of value add opportunity out there right now. Extremely low break-even occupancies. On an unleveraged basis, so if I buy a deal cash, I'm typically break even at about 35 to 36% occupancy. If I put debt on it, I usually break even around 65 to 67% occupancy.
Wow.
Easy eviction. So I know this is something that is kind of burns a little bit right now in the time that we're going through. And the reason I put evictions in quotes is because in the self-storage world, we actually are not guided by landlord-tenant law. We are actually guided by lien law, which means if you don't pay your rent, I sell your stuff and then I put a new tenant in place. It has a very high sticky factor. So what I mean by this is if I were to raise the rent on a, let's say $150 unit by 16%, typically my tenants would not move to go save that $5 or $10 somewhere else. Whereas if you're in multifamily or single family, because you have larger rent numbers, if you raise the rent on a $1,500 apartment unit, 16%, you better believe that tenant at the end of that lease, they're moving to a different property, across town. And then last but not least is they have ancillary profit centers. So not only am I collecting rent, but I'm also collecting income from selling locks, boxes, moving supplies, moving trucks, insurance premiums, cell phone towers, billboards. There's all these other profit centers that you can add on top of your rent to make these things cash flow even heavier than they already do.
Wow.
Oh,
Let's get into the meat and potatoes here, unless you guys have some questions about those first 9 points there.
well, I'm just going to make a quick comment. SBA loves self-storage as well because it's not just real estate, it's a business, and they will lend you money at a high loan to value based on the fact that it's a small business as much as it is real estate.
Yeah, I just got an SBA quote about 3 days ago, 10% down. They're waiving all closing costs, and they're also covering the first 3 to 4 months of principal and interest payments.
Wow.
There you
So
go.
fantastic leverage. And I think our rate was at 4.25.
Yeah, can't beat that. Can't beat that.
So just to show you.
Crazy. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into underwriting a self-storage facility real quick, and I'll kind of do high level, but I'll still give examples of a specific deal that we purchased a couple of years ago. The very first, what we're going to cover is traffic counts and location, demand drivers and demographics, competition study, seeing what your competitors are doing in the markets, supply index number, or what we call supply and demand analysis, to make sure you're buying in the right place or building in the right place. And then last but not least, actually looking at the property itself, looking at the financials on the property to see if it makes sense. All right, so first off, here's the property that we purchased. It was in Central Illinois. It's called American Self Storage. It was a Class C facility. As you can see, no fence, all drive up, no climate control. It had a little office in the front. There's the address. It had 194 units. It was drive up, non-climate controlled, had 12 buildings, 1 office, and then 1 home. It did have on-site management, but as we operated the property and put in some management efficiencies, we were able to reduce the hours. All right, so here's what it looked like. As you can tell, nothing special. It's solid Class C facility with a little bit of value add that need to be done. So on the traffic counts, one of the reasons why traffic counts are still important for self-storage is because the majority of your tenant base or customer base are coming from a small trade area, typically a 3 to 5 mile radius around your self-storage facility. What we've seen is that these tenants typically choose a facility that they've seen before. So they drive to and from work every day. They don't really notice a self-storage facility. It's kind of in the back of their mind. But then all of a sudden, when the need hits them, they're moving, they're changing jobs, they remember this facility that they drive past all the time and then go in to get a unit. Now, with the advent of the internet becoming more and more popular and these cell phones that have just insane computing power just in your pocket, what we've noticed is now the spread of people coming in is actually starting to move towards online. So in a recent study we did across our portfolio, we found that actually 60% of our new tenants, the ones that came in after we acquired the facility, actually found us on the internet. And not only on the internet, they found us through an internet app on their phone. So it was mobile-based tenancy.
Excellent.
So what we look at is when we go to find these properties is very first thing is we will look at the market that they're in and we'll pull up the State Department of Transportation website. So because this was in Illinois, we went to IDOT and then we clicked on their traffic count maps. Rule of thumb, if this is your first investment, make sure you have at least 12,000 cars per day. That's a really good start for your first facility. So let's look at the subject property. The star is where it's located. As you can see on the curb cut, it only has about 5,700 cars. So that's a little bit low for a first time deal. Now, this was not our first deal, so we weren't afraid of that necessarily. Secondary road had about 9,100. So getting a little bit better, but still not above the threshold for a first time investor. And then the last part was we look at the nearest highway, which here actually happens to be pretty close. Had a highway count of about 25,000 cars per day. So that's starting to get into the realm that we really like. So on this property, traffic counts, not the best, but they're trending in the right direction. The second thing we look at is demand drivers. So self-storage, we're getting a majority of our tenant base from dense residential. So about 70% of our clients are going to be what we call residential customers. Now, when I first got involved in this business, I thought all the self-storage users lived in tiny 300 square foot, shoebox apartments with no garage, no attic, no storage space. But then when we actually did the numbers, we found that wasn't true at all. Only 27% lived in apartments. 67% actually lived in single family homes. And of that 67%, 65% had garages, 47% had attics, and 33% had basements. Wow. And I was scratching my head for a second, but then I started thinking about my own family and how every time we'd get a larger space to live in, all of a sudden we magically filled all of that space, right? And that's what typically ends up happening with people. Now, the customer base that I really like are the commercial-based customers. About 17% of our customer base is commercial. I like them because they have the longest average lease term, about 25.2 months. They'll typically prepay their rent 6 to 12 months in advance, and they'll typically rent multiple units at once. These are going to be people that maybe they aren't to the point in their business yet where they can afford a warehouse. So they actually use us as a stepping stone up to those warehouses. And now during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people getting out of their warehouse leases and scaling down, letting everyone work remote, and then using our facilities as kind of a hub. We had another company that was a tortilla company. And this was a property in Illinois. They would manufacture the tortillas in the city of Chicago. They would ship them they'd truck them to our self-storage facility. They had 4 units, and then a semi truck would come up to our self-storage facility, load all 4 units, and then take that out to across the nation where they sold all their tortillas. Wow. So almost like a hub and spoke model. Very interesting.
It's
The
interesting.
next major demand driver is students. Students are great because if you're near a college, you'll always be able to find demand. They account for about 6% of your population. The tough part about students is they have a very low average lease time. It's roughly about 4.2 to 4.6 months. And that's because they're typically storing their possessions from college on summer break because they don't live in the area. And then when they come back, they pull it out of storage and then put it into a new apartment that they're renting or the dorm or what have you. And then the last demand driver that we really look for all the time is military. Especially if you're around any type of military bases, these are great tenants. They always pay on time. When they have anything showing up, maybe they get deployed, they give you a letter well in advance. Really helps with the long-term tenancy. Their stay is a little bit longer as well, which helps kind of smooth out the move-ins and move-outs.
Mm.
So let's look at our subject property. As you can see, the property is on the lower left-hand side. You can see a large neighborhood over to the northeast of the property. So that's very good for us. And then when you zoom out a little bit farther, then you see more of a luxury style development area around a lake. So typically people that are a little bit more affluent, they start storing things like boats, big toys, RVs, four-wheelers, jet skis. So we like that type of tenant base. They take larger units as well. So how do we poll our demographics for a self-storage facility? Well, like I mentioned before, we create what's called a trade area radius. And that trade area is going to change depending on how densely populated that area is. So if we're in an urban core like downtown Chicago, we're only going to look at about a mile because there's so many people packed into that 1 mile, and they won't want to drive really more than that to get to a self-storage facility, even if they'll save a couple bucks. The example I always use is if you're in downtown Manhattan, you're not going to go 3 miles to save $5 because time is money to you, right? So you'd rather have something right around the corner. You can go get your stuff, and it takes only 15 minutes. For suburban and exurban, we look at about a 3 to a 5 mile trade area. What I describe exurban areas is like the area between a suburb and rural. This is typically where your large home developers will buy 100 acres of land and then put up, 600 homes. These are the exurban areas. We like buying in these areas because land is cheap, the properties are cheap, but there's a ton of growth coming in our path of progress. And then rural properties, which we've actually made a lot of money off of rural properties, we'll use a 5 to 10 mile radius. If it's a hub city or hub town where maybe has like a super Walmart, we'll even expand that trade area out farther, maybe 15, 20, 25 miles, depending on where people are coming from to use the storage or to shop at these super Walmarts. 90% of your tenants will come from this trade area. So it's very important to make sure you identify the proper one. So self-storage is highly localized, which gives us opportunities to find underserved markets. I always kind of chuckle when people say, oh, self-storage is so saturated. It's like, is it? Where is it saturated? Tell me. Well, I heard Chicago saturated. It's like, okay, what part of Chicago? Chicago is massive. So what 3 to 5 mile area are you talking about that's super saturated? We can be in a pocket that has so much supply that all the competitors are undercutting each other, only 50% occupancy, but then you move 5-6 miles east or west, and all of a sudden, every facility is at 100% occupancy with wait lists. Rents are going through the roof, and nobody's moving out. So it is a very hyper-localized business. So how we usually do this is we'll use demographic software. SiteWise Mobile is a free app that I've used in the past. We also use Esri data. And the things that we're typically looking for are going to be renter population, total household income, total households in the area. And then we'll draw these trade areas using Google Earth. Again, another free app that you can use. So let's look how we do this. Here's an example of SiteWise Mobile. This is the subject property in Danville. So I just drop a pin on it and I drew concentric circles, a 1 mile, a 3 mile, and a 5 mile radius, just to see what we have. And then here's all the demographic data that it gave me. What's the population? What is the breakdown of that population, median age? How many of those homes are are owner occupied, how many are renter occupied. These are always going to help. Typically, renters are going to use our facilities more often than homeowners. So we always look for a heavy rental population. So here's Google Earth, where I drew those concentric circles. And the way I do it is I just use the little measuring icon on the top there. And that allows me to draw the certain mile radiuses that we need. The other thing we look at, like I had mentioned before, is any type of population growth or being in the path of progress. So when we purchased this property, we heard of this casino that might have been coming into town. Later on, it was confirmed that this casino was going to be being built in the area. So that's going to drive a lot of transient population. A lot of people are going to come work at the casino, but not necessarily live in the area that the casino's in. Perfect example of this is if you ever go to Vegas and you talk to anyone that works in Vegas, they typically don't live in Vegas. They live somewhere else. They fly in. So these people need storage. Let's look at the demographics of the subject property. So median household income, about $39,000. The population in the 5 mile trade area is about 35,000 people. Total housing units, 16,500. And there is population growth that's coming because of the new casino that was approved. The rule of thumb, again, for a first-time investor is you want the median income to be about $45,000 or more. And the reason why is if you're too low, people don't have the money to afford, additional rent on things that they don't need. If you're too high, these people typically have massive houses where they have all the storage they need. So all of a sudden, if you start getting into median incomes of $150,000, $200,000, maybe not the best place for storage. It has diverse industry. That's one of the things that we really like to see. I don't want to invest in a town where there's only one manufacturing plant and then all of a sudden the manufacturing plant leaves and then the town collapses. So we're going to make sure that we're looking for diverse industry and job growth, and then a strong residential presence. So with those things in mind, our subject property, like I said before, the traffic counts are all right. The demand drivers are starting to get closer to the metrics that we need as a first-time investor. So now let's look at how to do competition studies. So for us, one of the easiest ways to tell if a property is in an area that we want to buy in is to just call the competitors and see what their occupancies are. In general, in the self-storage industry, if you have a property that's at 90+% occupied, it is considered stabilized. It is full. And the reason why it's at 90% is because if you go above 90%, that means that you're not charging high enough rents. Sure. You can actually make more net income by being at 90% occupancy, driving rents, than you could be at 100% occupancy. So one of the things we always look for. So like I said, we use the Google Earth to create that trade area. And then we identify the competitors within that trade area. We will secret shop them to find out what their occupancy is, as well as what their street rates are that they're advertising. We'll identify which competitors are expanding, which ones are stabilized, or which ones are struggling, because just looking at occupancy doesn't tell the whole picture. What if a facility 2 months ago just doubled the size of the amount of units it had online by building because it was doing so well, and you notice that it's at 54% occupancy? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing if they've been around for 20 years, have never expanded. But if they just expanded, that's a good sign for you as an investor. So let's look at this. Here is our subject property, American Self-Storage. And you can see as far as population and as far as the breakdown of where the competitors are, we're sitting pretty. We have one competitor that's right up the road. We actually are under contract to buy that competitor right now. And then the rest of our competitors are past the 3 mile radius range. So we're capturing a lot of customer base that don't have other options for storage, or maybe they don't want to go all the way into town to get their storage needs fulfilled. So there's the first competitor. And then here are the remaining ones outside of our 3 mile radius. So how do we do this competition study? Well, we become secret shoppers. So very first thing is we're going to call the competitors. And we're going to try to see how much information their manager is willing to give away to us without realizing what we're doing. We're going to ask everything from what type of units do you have? How many do you have occupied? What are the rates? What are the street rates versus what are the discount rates you'll give people if you're trying to run promotions to fill up? And we're going to track all these things in a spreadsheet. If they're unwilling to give us those things over the phone because Their manager has been trained by the owners, like what we do with our company, never to give away these type of data. Then what we're going to do is we're going to turn into a would-be customer, and we're going to show up at their facility, and we're going to say, hey, why don't you show me around the site? I'm deciding between renting at a few facilities. Just want to walk around and see, what it looks like. And as I'm walking around with the manager, or if they let me walk around without the manager, I'm counting how many locks are on every one of the doors. I'm counting all the doors they have. I'm seeing which locks have the red manager lock over them, meaning it's either vacant, or which units have 2 locks on them, meaning that tenant is in arrears and hasn't paid, so the manager put an overlock on it. And then we double check the numbers by paying for a third-party feasibility study. Bob Copper is one of the ones that's known really well in the industry. Catherine DiAgostino is another one. These are third-party contractors that we have to pay them up front, and they are not getting anything from giving us a favorable or unfavorable designation for this property. And that just helps us double check our numbers. It helps us raise capital from equity investors, and it also helps us get debt from local banks. So these feasibility studies usually cost around $5,000 to $10,000, depending on who you're going with and the complexity and size of the project you're looking at.
Would you
All right, so let's look at yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, would you recommend that to a first-time?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. Because what ends up happening is when you're running your first deal, you start getting something. I have a business partner, he calls it cocaine brain, where you are so interested in buying your first property that you start looking past all the negatives and only seeing everything through rosy colored glasses. Right. So you need someone that has no stake in the project to look at it, to make sure that you're not missing anything. And what we'll do is we'll do this in stages, right? So first we'll do our desktop underwrite, which we're going through right now. If it makes sense, then we'll send it to a lender, and then the lender will underwrite it. And then we'll go ahead and then pay the $5,000 or $10,000 for a third-party feasibility study when we know, we're at about 90% sure that we're going to close on this deal. So with our subject property, here's the competition studies we did. I basically write them down based off of location and how far they are from our facility. As I said before, you can tell if they're stabilized or if they're expanding. And then I go and get the occupancy counts. So as you can see, those first 3, the closest ones to me, they're all at 98+% occupancy. That is a great sign for us. That means either they're not charging enough or they have wait lists, but it means when we buy this property, this subject property, we have the ability to raise our rents. We have the ability to add additional units. Then you see these 2 units, these 2 facilities below there at 31.8 and 20% occupancy. And that might scare you. But then again, because we look to see what was going on, the whole picture, we noticed that the one at 31.8%, they tripled the size of their facility within the last year and a half. And then the one at the bottom, Extra Space Storage, was actually a new development by one of the large REITs in the United States. So that's also a really good sign, because REITs typically develop on a 30-year timeline, whereas us investors, we will usually buy on a 5 to a 10-year timeline. So if they see future growth in the market where they're willing to cough up the big bucks to build these massive facilities, that's good news for us. Mm-hmm. All right, so rule of thumb, for your first-time investor, you want to see competitors all at about 90+% occupancy with unmet demand. You want to see new developments by large REITs, because that is saying that they believe in the market on a long-term basis. You want to see that existing competitors are expanding. That means that they've filled up all their units and there's still unmet demand in the area. So now that we finished that, we know that traffic counts are all right. Demand drivers are also all right. The competition study is extremely favorable for this pocket in Danville. The next thing we're going to look at is let's get really fine-tuned into the supply and demand analysis. So this is something called what is called the supply index number in the industry, or a supply and demand analysis. All right, so what is a supply index number? The supply index number is the measure of supply and demand within your designated trade area. It's measured by the amount of net rentable storage per person in that trade area. And the reason I say net rentable is because when you have certain buildings that are, let's say, climate control, where all the units are inside, you may lose 25 to 30% of your square footage to hallways and offices and bathrooms and mechanical closets. So this measurement is made on a net rentable basis, the actual square footage that the facility is renting to customers.
Right.
So this is the equation right there. It's net rentable square feet divided by the population in that trade area. So national equilibrium is 5.83 square feet per person. Now, this is a national average. These numbers change significantly depending on where you are. So, for example, if you look in Texas, Houston, if you look at Dallas-Fort Worth, if you look at the Carolinas, another super hot market for self-storage right now, these supply index numbers may actually be in the 10 or 12 square feet per capita. And the reason why is the population is growing so fast that it's not showing up in the census data yet. So just because you have a high supply index is not necessarily something to be worried about, especially if you're in a high growth market like you guys are in the Carolinas. But if you're in a pretty stabilized market, something that's old and not growing or even contracting a little bit, then you're going to start paying more attention to this supply index number. And then when you look at the differences between density type in a city center versus a rural area. So if you look in downtown Chicago, a 1 mile radius may have hundreds of thousands of people because you have skyscrapers that go up 100 stories, right?
Sure.
Whereas if you're in a rural area in a 1 square mile, you may have one person because that person owns the entire acreage in that 1 mile area, right?
Yeah.
So things just to offset the supply index number. Again, you got to look at it globally with context clues, not just as an absolute number. So typically when we're developing properties, we aim for sub 5 square feet per capita. When we're buying, we're willing to go a little bit higher than that, especially if it's in a fast growth market. Slam dunk deals for us are sub 3. If we can find sub 3, I'm trying to buy literally any land for sale in that area and put up as much self-storage as I can in a short period of time as possible.
Nice.
All right, so how do we pull the supply index number? Again, we're going to go back to our trusty friend, Google Earth, to do the desktop underwrite. We're first going to find the net rentable square feet of each competitor using a measuring tool. Now, this is a free way to do it. There's also paid ways to do it by going to these aggregator websites such as Radius Plus, Yardi Matrix, REIS data. These subscriptions usually cost $15,000 to $20,000 a year. It's not typically worth it for a first-time investor, but once you start catching steam and you're like us where you're buying 10 to 15 of these self-storage facilities per year, 15 grand really isn't that much and will save you a lot of time on this underwriting. But because this is geared towards the first-time investor, I'm going to show you how to do it for free. It just takes a little bit longer. So we're going to pull up our competitors on Google Earth. So this is the closest competitor that's about a half a mile up the road, called Hillary Storage. We're going to look at the buildings and we're going to use this polygon tool. That polygon tool is going to allow us to measure each one of these buildings and it'll tell us the square footage of that building. So then we take the total square feet and then we know that because this is a drive-up building, it's not climate control. That facility, that number is the actual number. Right? There's no hallways in these buildings. And you can tell based on just what the building looks like. When it's these row buildings, these are typically non-climate control. You just drive up to your unit. So each one of these units have about 4,500 square feet per. Now, like I said before, with some of these REITs and some of these larger climate control facilities, you actually lose about 25 to 30% of the space to hallways and common areas. So let's do an analysis on one of those types of buildings. Let's go to that REIT that's in the market. Extra space storage. It has about a gross square footage of 78,000 square feet, which means the net rentable square feet should be roughly around 55,000. So here's the polygon I drew. The reason I cut out that little piece is because I actually drove the facility and realized that they rented about a fourth of that building to a gym. So wrote out that polygon. That's how I got that 78,000 square feet. And then we did the equation to figure out what the net rentable was. All right, so I did that with all of the facilities, and here you can see the numbers. This allows me to get all the square footage I have in the trade area and then divide it by my population that I have in that area. So when we did that, you can see here is our supply index numbers. So because it's a more rural property, we're going to be looking at the 5 and the 10 mile numbers. You can see a 6.1 to a 5.1. So still pretty good, a little bit higher than what we see for development property. But because this is in a stabilized market and it's an existing facility and all the competitors are fully occupied, we're very comfortable with this property here. So why is the 3 mile supply index concerning? Well, it's because our closest competitor is half a mile away from us. So how do we mitigate against that? By exactly doing what we're doing right now, purchasing out our competitor. And we're able actually to pay more than what we were able to pay on the subject property, because when you aggregate self-storage, when you go to sell or go to refinance, you get better terms and you get lower cap rates on your sale. So we're actually able to pay more once we've established a foothold in that market.
Wow.
Second way to mitigate is to just buy at a high cap rate. If we can buy it at a high cap rate, I don't care if this thing's not going to value add, because it's going to cash flow day one. It's going to pump out a lot of cash. All right, so we saw the traffic counts were all right. Demand drivers also all right. Competition study extremely favorable. Supply index good, but needs a little bit of mitigation. And when we look at supply index, we're always giving weighting to not only the supply index, but also the competitor. So we'll typically give a 50 to a 75% weight on the competitor occupancy, and then a 25 to 40% weight on the actual supply index number itself. So after we've decided that the market is good, then we look at the property. So I don't look at the numbers on a property first. It doesn't make sense, because if the numbers on a property look good at first, but it's in a market that's sliding, why am I going to buy there for the long term? So we don't do the actual property analysis until we hit each one of these funnels. And this is how we pre-qualify all of our deals, so that our underwriters aren't wasting time on deals that they don't need to be looking at, because we know the market's going to be bad. So once it hits the top 4 criteria, then we'll actually start reviewing the property itself.
Excellent.
I think this would be a really good place for us to stop.
Okay.
Continue on our next one.
This is great stuff.
I'm telling
man.
you, I
This
don't
is
want you to
great.
stop. It's really good. It's really good. It's so detailed. I even texted one of my business partners and said, you need to get online and watch this. Really, really good.
Yeah,
Really.
so Scott made a smart ass comment. I've never seen Bill so quiet for so long.
It's really incredible. Good.
I do have one quick question for you.
Sure.
When you're talking about the income for that area, the median income, are you also looking at a cost of living index so you can kind of keep the same margin, depending on where you live? Because obviously, when let's say in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, you're probably going to be in the 32 to 36,000.
Right.
And then, obviously closer to Chicago at 42, you're actually it's going to cost you more to live there. So are you looking at any of those kind of indexes to offset that?
Yes, absolutely. And so when we go into our actual underwriting, it gets a lot more granular, but I just wanted to present kind of high level for everybody here. But that's a great point. If you have a property in Connecticut, the cost of living is high and the median incomes are very high. And just like you said, I may buy a property, say, outside of the city of Chicago, where the median income may be 30,000, but just to live there, you're spending 18,000 to 20,000 a year just on housing. So these are the factors that we're always going to mitigate against. And we usually do this by categorizing the area based on a primary, secondary, or tertiary market. And that usually helps as well when we look at the cost of living index compared to the median income.
Excellent.
Great stuff. Good stuff. Unbelievable good stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that we have to stop, but we're running out of time on this one.
It's okay.
I want to make sure we tease it for the next time you're up.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any idea when you're on the calendar? Because I forgot to look.
I don't know. Scott, do you know?
It's going to be soon.
It's going to be soon.
I can't wait. Yeah,
pull it up.
I get into the property analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we tried to do it as back to back as possible. So Teresa's got that information, and we'll definitely promote that as we send these announcements out to our list.
Yeah.
Fernando,
Sure.
you did an awesome job. Thank
Good
you
stuff.
so much.
Awesome.
Storage stud.
Learning.
This is storage stud.
Yes, he is.
It's true. It's true.
Folks, thank you very much. You can add some questions here and we'll keep our eye on it. And you can add your questions over to in the chat side and we'll make sure that Fernando can answer those on the next show. Okay. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for joining us on the Passive Wealth Show.
Can't wait till next time.
What?
I said I can't wait till next time.
I know, yeah. Because
Stop interrupting me. I have a hard enough time saying all this stuff.
he hasn't talked in 40 minutes. He's
Don't say it. We are Carolina Capital Management. We are a lender in the Southeast for investment properties. So if you're a borrower, go to carolinahardmoney.com. Click on the Apply Now button. If you're a passive investor looking for passive returns, click on our
Accredited
investor tab. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff. Don't forget that we have a link there into the QuestCon event coming up April 17th and 18th. If you use the link that's in the chat, you get half price on your tickets.
It's all about
It's
lending.
all about lending this time. Is there anything else?
That's it.
no, you did great, Bill.
Okay, thank you. I finally get to talk again.
It was exploding.
Fernando, thank you again.
Awesome stuff.
And we'll have
Just
him back
awesome.
shortly with the second half. And I can't wait. 'Cause
Maybe it should be 3.
It's great information. Yeah, we may do a third.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody have a great day. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.